Let me delete this thing so it doesn't echo. All right, now I gotta find you again. Here we go. Now we have Dr. Kara Cooney in the building, the Egyptologist, archaeologist, professor of Egyptian art and architecture at UCLA and chair of the Department of Near Eastern Language and Cultures at UCLA. You've probably seen her from TV shows, documentary film Out of Egypt, late night talk shows. I forget the name of the guy, the Scottish or British guy that you've had several. Okay, Craig Ferguson, correct. As I've watched, she's written several books. When Women Rule the World, 2018. The Woman Who Would Be King, 2014, and several other books and publications that the commoner probably will never hear of, more scholarly works or whatnot. I know you've written so many books. And you have another book that comes out in November, I believe in the fall, called The Good Kings, Absolute Power in Ancient Egypt and the Modern World.
That's right.
Correct? Yeah. Right. And well, first off, I want to start out with your fascination. What got you into Egyptology or history or whatnot?
It's a hard question to answer. I've always been interested in the old and dead. I don't know why. I was always that kid hanging around my grandmother, asking her about the horses walking down the street in Chicago, delivering the ice that you got every week, packed in sawdust. You know, these things were of interest to me. I don't know why. And it was extraordinary. My grandmother was extraordinarily interesting to me because she came from a time of horses and carts to a time of automobiles and planes and computers. And I wanted to know what that felt like to time travel like that.
Right. So speaking of time travel, your husband, isn't he an engineer, aerospace engineer or whatnot?
Yeah, okay. He is.
Right.
He works with satellites. Yeah.
Okay, got you.
But so I don't know the answer. I don't know why Egypt never ceases to bore me, and why I feel so attracted by this culture. And but I love going to Egypt. When I'm in Egypt, I'm like, oh, this is wonderful. I love Egypt people, their sense of humor.
Or could it be because you're 5% African, as you said in one of your YouTube videos I've heard, through the DNA testing or whatnot.
Yeah, that's right. And it was not my DNA test that showed it. It was my mother's. And they keep taking it away. So my mother's DNA test shows a significant amount of North African, including Coptic Egyptian. And so I've got it, but it doesn't show up on my test. If it's too small, I think they just move it to the side and say general, because a lot of people from Greece and Italy, and that's that side of the where it comes from, have these North African roots as well. So it just becomes generalized Greece and Southern Italian. So
right. So how many times have you actually visited Egypt?
I don't know, actually. I haven't counted it up, but
that many.
Yeah, it's a lot of times, like probably more than 30. But I don't count. And but when I had my son, when he was young, I didn't go for a long time. So I didn't go to Egypt for probably 5 years in a row, maybe longer. So when I got back for the first time, it was great. It was great.
Okay. Around what year was the first time you?
1995. I first went 1995 as a young.
Yeah, definitely. No, well, one of the reasons why I found you fascinating is because, of course, you're open, candid, approachable person, although I'm really nervous right now. Direct, and as you said, sometimes can be an intense. I'm using your words, and I like it. Also, I didn't realize you were 6'1" as well. I'm 6'5". You're 6'1". You said you grew instead of.
I started doing Pilates reformer, and Pilates on the reformer corrected my scoliosis. So now I'm 6'1.5".
Wow. Wow. And like you said, when you went to, I remember on the late night show, when you go into Egypt, the people are looking at you kind of like, wow, who's this tall, tall woman walking around and whatnot.
Yeah. And it's
Now,
funny, in the African continent, the taller people are generally darker people from the south, and the
okay.
shorter people are the more northerly people, right? And with the lighter
Right, right,
skin. And so
right,
it's
right,
a
right.
bit confusing to see somebody with lighter skin who's also
Mm,
extra tall. So I'm messing with all the stereotypes.
right. And yeah, when I first discovered you, it was on Twitter. I was following a no, she's not Egypt. She's a professor out of Exeter University.
Mm-hmm.
Professor, I'm gonna butcher her name, I'm sure. Francesca Stavra Capolo. Or what do
Oh,
you
I can't pronounce it either, but I know who you
you
mean.
know what I'm
Yeah,
talking about?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
She's into the Hebrew Bible and ancient
Mm-hmm.
religion, and she's a
Mm-hmm.
feminist and atheist or
Mm-hmm.
whatnot. So I got one of her videos, and then I just checked her out on Twitter and followed her a bit, and then she might have retweeted something that you had said or whatnot, and so that's how I came in to find you. And I didn't make the connection with when women ruled the world, because I believe I've seen it featured in National Geographic or one of those magazines,
Mm-hmm.
passing through the airport and whatnot, and I was really fascinated by it, and I didn't make that connection at the time, who the author was, and it was you. Um, so, and then also how outspoken you are and on social media about racism,
Yeah.
and so I therefore I followed a lot of your and read a lot of your tweets uh, when it came to that, and also you had started a YouTube channel, not too long ago. Not too many people know about that, but I've
No, I
right,
haven't publicized it a whole lot, and I haven't added to it a lot later because
yeah,
I've been so busy writing my latest book.
right,
So
doing more
there's
important
only so much
more
time.
important things in social media, like you said.
Yeah.
And so that's where I was like, man, she just got on YouTube, and so some of your videos like monotheism,
Mm-hmm.
uh, which, like I've told you before we went live, that I'm kind of, I want to say, part of this Black conscious community, if we can call it that, here, and also I just keep up with the conversations in the States as well, in a lot of groups and things. And so I posted some of your, I believe I might have been the first one to post some of your videos that you've made. It was like, yeah, on monotheism or the Exodus, Egyptian slavery or racism, or what you like to call it, authoritarianism.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, hold up, I said, every time she wants to talk about white supremacy, and racism, as I like to call it on this show or whatnot, then she always uses the word authoritarianism, and all, which it is. Uh, and I agree.
Well, because we're talking about it internally in Africa in an ancient time, white supremacy ain't going to work, but it's
For
the
s-
same.
for
It's the same
for sure,
thing.
for sure, for sure. And one of the things that really shocked me and surprised me, and tell me if I got it wrong, because I've been saying this to a few other people. I was like, I went to a HBCU as well,
Mm-hmm.
in Oklahoma, where I'm from,
Uh-huh.
out of all places. I think it's the furthest to the west, they say, because most of them are concentrated in the South and the East Coast. In mine, I went to Langston University in Oklahoma, the one that's furthest towards the west. Anyway, and the reason I mentioned that, and I know Howard University, you had
Yeah.
posted something about Chadwick Boseman,
Yeah.
because he died not too long ago.
Yeah.
And the whole world was pretty sad about that. My son, in particular, because he loved Black Panther, he loves Black Panther. Um, and you posted something, one of his assignments or whatnot. You had said that you were one of his professors, and that threw me. That I mean, almost fell on the floor on that one. I was like,
It
wow.
made me almost fall on the floor too. And it was the weirdest thing because I was, when you're just waking up in the morning and Chadwick Boseman had just died. I knew him only as Black Panther in my mind. And I'm waking up in the morning and I'm in that in-between state between sleeping and waking. And this is 20 some years ago that I taught at Howard. And that
Wow.
hieroglyphs
That long
but it was
ago.
small, that long ago, but it was a small class, like 5 people, you know? And I started to think, wait a minute, who was that kid with the little braided hair that did that show about
Wow.
hieroglyphs? And the first time I met him, he had a hood on, like deep in the hood, right? And sat in the back of the room like this, arms crossed, and asked me if the ancient Egyptians were Black. And then a whole
Wow.
conversation, dude. Yeah. But it took me a while to figure out that this was the same guy. And since I put it on Twitter, another person has actually found the play that he wrote and performed in Philadelphia. And I have the script. So if you're interested in it, I can send it to you. But it's called
Absolutely.
Hieroglyphica. And then I realized, because this kid had invited me to a play of his that was based on all of this hieroglyphic knowledge that he had learned in the year studying ancient Egyptian. And
Right.
I went, and that moment between sleep and wake, I remembered the profile of his face, because the actor, this kid, as I remember him, came
See, in
down
this, in
holding
this
a
is, yeah.
candle. And I can remember the profile of his face, and I could remember it from that performance. And I went, oh my God, it's Chadwick Boseman. It's the same kid. And then I
Yeah.
started to look it up, and yeah, he did all of this hieroglyphic work at Howard, and I was there when he did it. So it's the same guy, and I hadn't realized it. So, yeah.
Wow.
It was really sad. It was
Yeah.
really sad.
So, I mean, way back then he was already,
Already thinking about it. Yes,
already
he's
thinking
thinking
about it.
about what it means to be an African American with African heritage. Where do you go? Where do you find your power, and what places? And a lot of people are led to ancient Egypt because it's the most powerful, right?
Absolutely.
Which
Well,
brings its own problems. But that's where he went. And the fact that he
exactly.
ended up in West Africa is fitting. But yeah.
Right, right. And I like what you said about because ancient Egypt is kind of the highest at the pinnacle. But with that being said, I've spoken. I had interviewed some guy that said kind of quite the opposite. He's in his opinion, he had mentioned that the highest cultures or whatnot, probably we haven't heard of them because of the you get what track I'm going on, because of the
Yeah.
monuments and things
Yeah.
like that. Mhm.
Yeah. The more work I do, and this is where I ended up with my book, The Good Kings, where I ended it is that which society would you rather live in? The one with the great monuments that makes you work all the time, or the one that gives you more freedom to build your own crappy house? And I think
Right.
most of us would rather live in the society with the crappy house, and wealth would be more equitably distributed. But no, it wouldn't leave as much of a trace in stone and monuments for the archaeologists. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't a great society. Our idea of greatness is completely skewed.
Right. True. True. And humans are very complex, as in ancient Egyptians, as you said. What was your favorite site there out in Egypt?
In Egypt?
Yeah.
Oh dear. I mean,
Personally, there's so many probably.
there's so many, but Luxor is probably my favorite place to go. And when I'm in Thebes, ancient Thebes, and I'm walking around those sites, East Bank, West Bank, I really feel connected to that place. So, Karnak Temple, Luxor Temple, Valley of the Kings, dear old Medina. It's Medinat Habu is probably a place where I could be there for days and years.
No,
Yeah, more great Ramses the Third.
right. Now I hear you talking about like you said, the Theban. You kind of give this separation with the Theban people and the what do you call it, the Levanites, Ramsidian,
Ramessids, yeah, and Levantine
the
people, yeah.
northern whiter people or whatnot. Yeah. So is that how close to Nubia or the Nubians? That was there. Is Luxor?
Luxor is I don't know how many miles, but it's a
Okay.
good flight from Abu Simbel. A short flight, like
Okay.
40 minutes, 30 minutes, but it's still a flight.
Right.
And if you drive there, I think it's like from Elephantine, Aswan, it would be another 5 hours drive to the border with Sudan. maybe 6.
Okay.
So it's pretty far. But there is still a north-south divide in Egypt, and this is something that I'm really interested in. But with the Nile being less a organizing force over people's lives in terms of flooding and the water's then receding, there's less of that. The water is just the same, right? And certain amounts are let out at certain times of the year, depending on the further south, but you don't get the flood that unified and centralized Egypt the way that you did in antiquity. And you don't have, Luxor is an interesting place because it's on the Cana Bend, which it's a curve of the Nile that turns kind of east-west instead of the Nile going north-south. And so it's very hard to navigate.
Is that one of those near one of those cataracts you call it, right?
No, there's no cataract here. It's a turn. It's a turn in the river. And because of that turn, in ancient times, it was very hard to navigate it with sails and move upstream, using the wind to go against the current. And for that reason, the people of Luxor have traditionally been very fiercely independent and separated from the rest of Egypt. And it's the place where where you can centralize easily and where the kings are born. And it's an interest, the kings of the first dynasty, kings of the 12th dynasty, or 11th dynasty, 12th dynasty, kings of the 18th dynasty. So many kings found their origins in the southern place. And now to see the southern place under the toe of the north, Cairo in particular, it's all flipped.
I like how you put that. Yeah. I was gonna ask, the work when women rule the world, you get into women power, but under a patriarchal system, correct? And how they were plenty of, but you said it was an anomaly or whatnot at the same time that they were called in every time they had to try to unify or organize the nation or whatnot. And at the same time, their power was usually not by violent means, by political means, correct?
Yeah, and they get violent if they had to, but yeah.
Right. And Hatshepsut, would you say that she was most of her power was through political means?
Yeah, Hatshepsut and not violent. I mean, it's a hard thing because I see where you're going, that this idea that women are somehow less violent than men.
Right.
And it's an interesting thing to ask. I read some anthropological studies about female politics amongst humans as higher mammals, however you understand that hierarchically, compared to higher apes, right? Like chimpanzees and gorillas. And amongst humans, chimpanzees and gorillas, females are just as aggressive, particularly chimpanzees and humans. They can be just as aggressive.
Well, misogynistic, as you say as well. They can be just as misogynistic and throwing other women under the bus. And
as long as there's a patriarchy. Under that bus, as long as there's a patriarchy, if women find a place in power, that doesn't mean she's not going to work against other women. Absolutely. But I think the reason that women are seen as more pacific, more peaceful in whatever way compared to men is because they have to be. They don't have access within a society to military systems. Certainly in the ancient world, when sexual dimorphism, the fact that women are smaller than men and can't fight in the same way that men can, and are barred from professions because of their child rearing responsibilities. Because of all those things, a woman has to be politic and work politically to gain any kind of power. And it's very hard for a woman to use the military to gain power. And an exception to that, of course, would be Cleopatra, who uses Mark Antony and his military to find power.
Wait a minute. I like the words that you had said, what I heard you say, bought her way through sex to two Roman generals and breeded children to create a dynasty in the Eastern Mediterranean. That's the way you had put it.
Yes, it's like she had her own harem. She acts the most man-like out of all of. She doesn't marry those two dudes. She finds the warlords she can find, and
Right.
uses them as sperm donors and military generals, and that's it. Yeah.
All right. About the Exodus, what
Mhm.
is your take on that? The consensus still says that it didn't
It's
happen.
as it's recorded in the biblical text, it's a story. It's a story of an escape. It's a story of 11 people being trapped in an Egyptian space under power that they cannot get away from. And it's a story of being led to a homeland. As that story goes, it's only recorded as such in the Hebrew Bible. And there's nothing from the Egyptian side about this story.
Because
But
that's a
there's so many things that,
huge discussion in the quote unquote black or like you say Afrocentric space community.
what's the discussion in the Afrocentric space? But tell me how that works.
Well, I call it the conscious community because there's a conscious community out of Harlem, New York, Philadelphia, Atlanta, and other places, even in London, are some kind of bigger, what I call so-called. Well, in the conscious community right now, what some people are doing, self-taught Egyptologists or linguists, what they're doing is trying to use historical comparisons with Egyptian Medu Neter, Egyptian language, to, I'm not saying it because I know you know way more than I do, but I'm just saying because the audience or whatnot. But they're trying to correlate that to today's languages and West African languages in particular, and say that we are part of ancient Egypt because look at the similarities in some of the languages. So they talk a lot about that. That's very heavy in the conscious community. They talk about like I said, the Exodus. You have some in Black Hebrews that claim that it did happen, and you have chematologists or whatnot that claim that claim that it didn't happen. And also there's a lot of discussion about the word kemet. Some say not only does it mean the black land, some say that it meant the black people. So and yeah, but I think that certain groups as of late are getting into more of the traditional kind of scholarship and kind of cleaning up some of this revisionist history as this feel good history as we say, and realizing that it meant land, but you still have a lot of people out there and
this is a tough one. I mean, I think that the cultural memory reflects something that's real. And
right.
I think that lots of pieces of evidence that show that this was a process that happened not in one moment, one event, but in a series of generations over a long period of time. And the Ramessid kings themselves are all these people with Levantine origins, Northeast Delta origins themselves, right? So there's a lot of, it's kind of like the situation is you got a king who was once Levantine, going back certain generations, whose father's name is Seth, right? If we're talking about Ramses II, which is like akin to being named Baal, very Levantine sort of name, a name of the desert and the Northeastern Delta. It's kind of like the analogy I like is the Mexican-Texas border, where you've got some Mexican Americans who are like, close the damn border. Who are these people coming over all the time, voting for Trump and feeling that this is protecting their own agendas? And then the newcomer is like, what the hell? You're working against your own people. How dare you? And the newcomer sees it in a completely different way. And I think with the thousands of years of toing and froing amongst Egyptian and Canaanite people, Levantine people, however you understand that, is always going all the way back to 4,000, 5,000 BC. There's people going back and forth over this Sinai expanse. And the connection between Egypt and Gaza today is still very close. So the connections were always there and are always there. And there will always be newcomers and then people who integrate themselves into the community and then act to repel or to enslave. My point, I guess, would be that my problem with some narratives about this. They oversimplify the good guys and the bad guys. And my point would be that and I'm not trying to say that there's fine people on both sides. That's not what I'm trying to say. But I'm trying to say it is so messy that see the same thing with immigration in the United States. You can have a new immigrant speaking up for BIPOC people because it fits with their agenda. But as soon as they reach a certain level of social stability, then they'll easily vote with the haves versus the have-nots, right? And it's a very complicated situation of who's in and who's out, who considers themselves Egyptian, whatever that means, and who doesn't, discussions of identity. It's as confusing and entangled and complicated a problem as you can imagine. And it's complicated. It's complicated. Yeah.
Now, as far as the Exodus, now you mentioned the Bible, but of course I'm talking about historicity, into your field, archaeology. Is the evidence? So to put this to rest, to bed. Now, what is the evidence? Exodus happened or didn't?
Okay, so there's something called the Israel Stela or the Merneptah Stela.
It's not a short answer like the racism one on your YouTube video.
No. Yeah.
See, this is why the debates are going on and on and on and on and on.
But the mess is the interesting part. So we're asking the wrong question, because to ask if the Exodus happened in the way that it did in the Bible is not, you're never going to answer that. And it's not, but the short answer then is the Exodus did not happen the way that it is presented in the Bible. That's my short answer. However, there are elements of cultural memory that are there. The Egyptians did invade the land of Canaan and the Levant and take a number of live captives. The people of Israel are mentioned at the bottom of Merneptah's Stela. There is an integration of people who are either in servitude as slaves or who are working as servants of some kind. There's an extraordinary amount of immigration of people who call themselves Syrians or associate themselves with being Canaanite in some way, or who have Levantine names. And I was just looking at the harem conspiracy papyrus of Ramses III, in which all of the conspirators who murdered Ramses III are mentioned in the text. Yes. And many of them are people of Levantine origin with Levantine names who are working as butlers and other servants in the temple space and in the palace, in the harem, right? So there's a lot of immigrants coming over and working, keeping their names and having no problem with keeping those Levantine names. And there is an instant, but where are you going to place it? You know, the other thing is the word Pithom. The name Pithom is probably Pi-Ramses or Per Ramses, the house of Ramses, the capital city in the Delta. But are you going to say that Pharaoh is Ramses II, Merneptah, go into the 20th dynasty, make it Ramses III, because we know now he was murdered, but he's murdered in a harem, so it's not quite the same story. Nothing's ever going to fit. So just think of it as the pharaohs in general and the Levantine people in general. And there's like a kind of move. What's clearly happening that's so interesting is what was a messier understanding of identity is becoming more nationalized. Think of how nationalism works, where people in Egypt today exclude others who they say are not Egyptian. Very strong nationalist movement in Egypt today. Strong nationalist movement in the United States today about you're not a real American, go back to where you came from kind of rhetoric, right?
I agree.
So that kind of nationalism, I think, was very strong in the Ramessid period, created by arguably immigrant kings or kings with an immigrant past, and who held on to it tighter than anybody else. It would be like, I don't know, Marco Rubio becoming president, something like that. That's a nice way of understanding it, right? And so I can't say, I will say the Exodus isn't true the way it's depicted in the Bible, but I will not say that the Exodus isn't true.
Correct. Well, you wouldn't rule it completely out. Something happened, like you said, a cultural memory.
Yeah.
How about in addition, the plagues?
Um,
Not exactly what the Bible, said it, but you believe that that's part of the cultural memory of things
well, I think
that
there's a
happened.
cultural memory of the fall of Egypt, because Egypt
Right.
does fall shortly after this time period. And
Right.
people love to conflate hundreds of years. So let's say that this stuff goes down, this exodus movement of people out of Egypt to create a nationalist identity of what will become the land of
Right.
Israel, right? And let's say that happens around
Now, mind you,
11.
some of these questions I'm asking you is not. I know I know some of the answers already, but for the
That's fine.
audience.
And you can jump in and
Yeah.
provide too. But let's say that happens around 1150, roughly.
Yeah.
But when the story is written down, it's going to be like, is maybe 800 BCE earliest, right? Earliest, but probably like 750 or something like that.
Yeah.
When the story is written down, Egypt, as the great strength that it was under the Ramessids, has fallen. And so there is an interest in explaining how this great and amazing thing that had enslaved all of their people has become what it is and has been brought to its knees. And
Right.
so the whole world has gone through what we call the Bronze Age collapse. And it's a couple hundred years of difficult experience in which governments collapsed all over the place and people broke up with their patrons and rose up against them. And there was mass immigration on a scale that we cannot possibly imagine, or maybe we can. And this Bronze Age collapse brought with it refugee camps, disease, kings that were once great were toppled. So I think there's a conflation of all of these different things happening in the world around the time period when the narrative was written down. And plagues are just a norm of living in the ancient world, and
Right.
apparently the pandemic today, living in the modern world as
Sure.
well. So, and I was just reading a biography of Marie Theresa, and I was looking at how many children she had and how many of them died of smallpox. So this is these things that people love to explain it. And think of what the religious right loves to do with a plague like AIDS, or a plague like the pandemic that we're currently dealing with, and how it can be blamed on outsiders, people of color, gay people, non-binary people.
That's when you get into the divine economic power.
Yeah. So it's a very useful thing to say, look at all these plagues, you guys, look at, I can count them, and I'm going to list them all, big thing, and convince people that this side is wrong and that side is right. In the end, in the book that I'm writing right now, both sides in my mind are patriarchal. And when there's a revolution or a breakup, it's just to create another patriarchy of deep social inequality. There is no, if you're within a patriarchal structure, there is no good guy at the end. Even the guy that throws off the yoke will end up becoming Stalin. So,
And that's another reason why, not just because you outspoken and spoke about racism, because you a lot of this these findings and things in ancient Egypt, you try to relate it to modern day kind of times, and that's what I like about it, because like you said, in ancient Egypt, there's this sense of it being a perfect civilization, a perfect society, when they had all the problems that we've kind of faced today.
Yeah, they're very good at idealizing and perfecting their system of government, in the same way that in the United States we idealize and perfect these founding fathers, whoever they are, and mythologize them and think that if we could only go back to the way things were then, everything would be perfect. There is this perfected past that people look to all the time.
Right. Now, another question: the Hyksos, that big subject, where they talk a lot about, were they the Jews, the ancient, the Hebrews or whatnot? Would you say? And I'm sure you heard that talk plenty, but was that ruled out already, that they weren't, or were they, or what was?
There are Levantine people. The Hyksos, Hatshepsut, rulers of foreign lands, were absolute people coming from the Levant, bringing with them their own Levantine cultural traditions.
Introduced the chariot and.
Yes, well, they got the chariot from somebody else. So the chariot is coming from Anatolia and potentially the Hurrian people, but it's coming from Anatolia. They're bringing the chariot in. Egyptians love the chariot, take it as their own, turn the fighting motif into Ramses mowing people over on a chariot. But
right.
but
No, but
the
well, the new talk is, was it an invasion, or was it like they had a recent article that came out not too long ago about them probably living there for countless amount of years, and they end up influencing certain people, and some people in the community. That's one debate. Did the Hyksos actually invade, or did they, as the article presented not too long ago, did they just kind of grow within, and they brought a lot of their culture and different things? And some even say that they kind of softened up the place for certain other foreigners to come in when they took over, because the Hyksos did take over the north, at least the northern, a great amount of, part of the north. I don't know, I forgot how far down south that they took over,
I
but
think it's to Heracleopolis is the saying going to go rhetoric. But you have to use ancient Egyptian tales to come up with this, like Second Enre and Apophis. That's a tale that you can use to look at, or the stele of Kamoza. I would alert your listeners to look at the work of Danielle Candelora, who's a recently finished PhD from UCLA, one of my PhD students. And I know, shout out to Danny's great. And she works on Hyksos, and she works with the Hyksos as fields of entanglement, middle ground, where you don't have simplistic narratives like invasions, or simplistic narratives like a wholly separate people coming in and not integrating and not bringing mutual influence. So there's mutual influence on going both ways, right? And there have always been Levantine Egyptian interactions in the Delta. This is the norm. And it's something that goes all the way back to the first dynasty. It is absolutely the norm. But and so you're asking me if invasion or a slow process of enculturation and movements of peoples. And the answer is, of course, it was both, and it was a messy reality, and it was all of the above. Because you wouldn't have the 14th, 15th, and 16th dynasties if you didn't have warlords with armies attached to them who are able to seize political military power in the Delta and display that power.
But at that time when the Hyksos took over, was it kind of like they were so weak in that area, or did nobody really had a stronghold in that area, or what?
So you're kind of asking, is it a chicken or the egg thing? Do these foreign peoples, are they only able to come in and take power when the Egyptians shoot themselves in the foot? Or do the foreigners coming in mean that that's part of the reason that the Egyptians lose power, right?
Well, some people even say that's the reason why ancient Egypt, finally, the dynasty, how the power, kind of like the fall of Rome, because of foreign invaders or whatnot. That's a whole nother subject, but yeah.
And the answer to that in many ways is yes. I have a lot of opinions on that one. But,
even though but even though, by saying that, even though ancient Egypt has always been kind of a multicultural place.
It's on a crossroads of continents, seas, and different peoples, and so it's part of the Mediterranean world. It is on the Mediterranean Sea. It is part of it is in Africa, no matter what some people want to tell you. And it is connected to the Eurasian continent, right? It's right there connecting to West Asia. And the fact that it's right there on all of these different crossroads means that everyone wants to claim it. And the fact that they built awesome shit means that people want to claim it more. So it is the arena to battle over who gets to claim this place. And this is where I go, come on. It's just, we're all arguing about who gets to claim another set of patriarchs who was extremely cruel outside, depicted them in certain ways, enslaved them outright. Yes, they built beautiful things, but it's another unequal society with all that comes with it, in all of the unequal and cruel patriarchy that comes with it. If we're trying to claim it, then it's just the patriarchs trying to claim the patriarchy. And I say, rise above that game and play a different one. It's time as a human society to realize that patriarchy has only been around for 10,000 some years. And it's gotten us nothing but a destroyed earth. And it's time to move on to something else. So we can, and really only 10,000 years to destroy the earth. That's pretty short. And we haven't lived with the patriarchy for forever. So we can argue about who gets Egypt. You know, do real Africans get Egypt, or do the Mediterranean people get Egypt, or the Levantine people get Egypt? And, you know, all of these discussions, and all three want it, right? And I'm like, come on, you guys can fight over it for forever. And I would rather transcend it and see the battle as the patriarchal bullshit that it is.
Right. Now, that leads me into Egyptology, the field of Egyptology. Is it racist? And I remember you said the short answer, yes. But if you can kind of elaborate on that, because there's into your upbringing in the system. You went to the University of Johns Hopkins,
yeah.
Okay.
And before that, University of Texas at Austin.
Oh, okay. Wow. So is it systematic, the Egyptology?
It's of course it's systemic, like any other system that systemically excludes people of color. Yes, and it takes all different kinds of forms. So it can be, you know, how many people go to school where they can do Latin or Greek?
Right.
Not many, right? You have to be of a certain socioeconomic class with a certain upbringing. How many people go to universities where they can do Middle Egyptian and learn these ancient languages? How many people learn written rhetoric and argumentation in that very obtuse and difficult way that academics use, that one has to master to be a part of this club, right? It's not something that just comes easily. It has to be trained. And then there's also the colonial aspect of a bunch of white people going into Egypt and explaining these monuments to people who, in Egypt at the time when the colonialism began, it was under the rule of foreigners, under the rule of Ottomans who claimed Egypt as their own. And so it was easy for them to sell things off to the British Museum. There's a reason that the British Museum has all this stuff from Egypt and from Greece, because the Ottoman Empire was in control of both and was very willing to sell all these things off to the highest bidder. So there's no problem. So the racism in Egyptology right now, it's stuck between a rock and a hard place, in my opinion. It's within the United States and Europe, but mostly the United States, where people are grappling with what it means to inherit a country built upon stolen land and stolen work. And we're looking to understand how Black Americans are part of our story, and how Egypt is truly within Africa, and it is an African thing in an African place. Egyptology as a field is fighting or in struggle with a nationalism within Egypt that doesn't really want to be African.
Absolutely not.
That is looking to and getting money from West Asia and Europe and the United States, and is looking to, it is becoming the colonized is becoming the colonizer, in a sense, right? And so Egypt's nationalism is, no matter what lip talk is given, is not very interested in integrating with Africa, but is interested in integrating with West Asia and Europe, Mediterranean, right? And so there is an Egyptian nationalism right now that is.
Well, speaking of that real quick, the Egyptian nationalism, is that, can we put that to bed too? How, you know, I see those comments on Facebook, even some of your followers on
There's nothing that gets hotter than that one. That one gets, but go on.
Yeah. No, when they talk about, Egyptians, oh, my father's father's been here. We are truly the real Egyptians and things like that. As far as in your professional opinion, the consensus says, I think they try to use some sort of DNA test that they did in, I forget what
Both
year it is.
sides, Robert,
Right.
both sides use DNA. So people coming saying that Egypt used to be completely black are using DNA.
No,
And
that's
people,
true. That's true.
And
That- and
people who are saying that, and that, white people stole, or Europeans invaded and stole our heritage, right? And
right.
And people, Coptic Egyptians will then use DNA to claim a kind of whiteness, right? Certainly a lack of blackness, certainly a lack of blackness. So both sides are using DNA, which is bullshit. And there's no DNA.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about is a country that is on the crossroads of these three different places. Everyone's trying to claim it, that has seen constant immigration, some more recent than others. But that doesn't mean that any of us can say who's a real Egyptian in the same way that you can't be a real American. So it's a stupid argument to even have, and it's an argument about power and nationalism and patriarchy. And it's bullshit. It's total bullshit. And when people do this, I'm like, no. So when a Black American engages with an Egyptian on my Twitter feed and says that somebody's not a real Egyptian, I have intervened and said, you can't say that somebody who's in Egypt is not a real Egyptian. When an Egyptian then says to an African American or African, to do with Egypt and it's not yours, I can then intervene and say, no, everyone gets to have a part of this. And it's so funny that I, as the white tall girl, fly above this shit. Because obviously I can't be any of these things, right? I've got my 5% though. I do. But I can't claim, and I don't try to claim. I just study the place. And so I'm there kind of saying, everybody, what are you even fighting over? We're all a mess. We're all just human beings. And there is no purity. There's no pure race. And this attempt to find a pure race is super dangerous. And it's dangerous from both sides. So, and race is its own fiction, right? So my
you posted yesterday about that too.
And I'm Shamarka Keita is a wonderful scholar to follow, and he's going to have an article
I heard of
volume that I'm working on. He's got a good social media presence. He's out there. He's good.
Absolutely. And speaking of what you mentioned in the video too about, and everybody heard about Ibram Kendi in the book Stamped, when he talked about, also we can, like you said, everything's not totally black as well, at the same time, flip side of the spectrum.
I think one key thing, and then I'll let you ask your next question, is that the word black is very problematic within Egypt, and assigning the word black to people, they get
shook. I know. I realized that.
And so it's taken me a long time to realize that it's a word that used to be very problematic in the United States as well, but is now being radically reclaimed, right? And we're being told, no, don't say African American, say Black American, but whatever. It's a word that connotes pride and belonging in the United States and true meaning. But there's also a separation. In Egypt, the gradient is complicated in terms of color and skin color. And I'm not saying there's no racism in Egypt, by no means. And I'm not saying there's no colorism. There certainly is. But the word black is, if you use that is a trigger. And it's a trigger to get people to fight, right or wrong. But that's within the Arabic language and their Arabic culture, that's where they're coming from. And so you could have an argument with a person on Twitter who, if they were in Alabama
at the same time, for African Americans, when they hear the Arab word Abdullah for slave, they get a little triggered too.
Oh yeah. But think about it. You can talk to an Egyptian who, if they lived in Alabama in 1954, would have had to sit at the back of the bus, argue vehemently that they are not black, right? Because the word to them means something different than what it means to us. So that's okay. I just think that there's got to be more listening on either side to understand how these things work.
Right.
Messy. Always messy.
Right. You spoke about Jim Crow monuments, the BLM, Black Lives kind of made that association, like kind of like similar to Robert E. Lee and, like you said, Ramses, if they were to throw the monuments. What was your? I don't think you kind of get. Well, yeah, you did kind of give your take on that or whatnot. At what did you say? Not just throwing the monuments in the water, but setting them up some other place that they
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, because people get very upset. You could talk to a Coptic Egyptian who would be extraordinarily upset about anybody saying anything negative about Ramses and
Right,
don't bring up slavery, right? And it wasn't as
right,
bad as you think it was. It's all the same.
right.
It's
Since
the same
since
conversation.
since since we're going around cleansing all monuments across the
Yeah.
globe.
Yeah, but these things need to be, I mean, make no mistake, I think my next book, The Good Kings, is going to make a lot of Egyptians very upset because I'm coming in and saying, I'm taking something that has been put on a pedestal as a
You,
real perfected and good kingship. You know, people are safer under Putin, you know, people are
you,
safer. Hey, it's better, you know, but taking it and looking at it as an authoritarian is like anything else. And I think I'm gonna
and
have some problems.
and I like your mother is. I'm waiting on this next book, as you mentioned before, that she's you mentioned your mother. She's really looking forward to the books that you have that are talking like about kind of politically and can
Yeah.
relate to things, issues. Now I'm really waiting for that as well. And I agree with you. You're gonna have some, yeah.
Yeah.
But with that being said, since you've been so outspoken and things like that, do you sense that some Egyptologists are kind of scared to pick up the race
Oh
talk
yeah.
when it comes to
Oh yeah.
that because they're scared that they won't be looked at as their work won't be looked at as much, or they would eventually probably be looked at their scholarship as well, be looked at as fringe, uh,
I think it's
and not
more.
taken as
I
seriously eventually
you're
down the road.
yeah, you're asking lots of different things, and you know what?
Yeah,
Yeah, no, but it's okay. But what the agenda is of Egyptologists who don't speak up on this, I think number one, if you work in Egypt and your permission comes from the Egyptian government, then if you do speak up about these things, you're potentially not going to get permission to work in Egypt, and that's a
that was
real
another thing I was going to get
that's a
into
fun.
because
Yeah.
because I remember you mentioned so Hawass.
Mhm.
I wanted to ask you what you really thought about him, but I was like,
I
because
you know
she still wants to go there and yeah,
Yeah. And I
is it,
and I am going to Egypt.
yeah,
And my opinions on Hawass are as complicated as anybody's opinions on
hmm
Hawass. But where I do speak out about Zahi Hawass is when he says that the ancient Egyptians were Caucasoid, not Negroid. And you can go and read that in 2005 in an issue of
I,
National
I
Geographic.
I know, yep.
And the
That's
fact that
he took a bold. I was like, wow, and
he just said this again. He said it again in print, and it made a bunch of presses. And you know
mm,
that the ancient Egyptians were not black. And I just,
this is why I'm like, that's why you have a certain sect of people talk about speaking about whitewash. Do you think that they some of the monuments and certain things that there's some people that say they go in
no,
and change the color of no.
no, no. It's funny. I've heard this before. I've heard, oh, the noses are all removed because they had African noses, and so they take the noses
Well,
off to not
not
that. I've
not necessarily the noses. That'd be more difficult to duplicate or put back. But I'm saying like certain drawings or whatnot, like the paint, the color of the certain skin, or I don't know. There was this
no, I
talk
think.
about some of them going through to yeah
I mean, I
whitewashing
think
environments.
that I'm trying to see if I have an image. I usually have an image of Nefertiti up somewhere. You could take the image of Nefertiti with that skin color that is very naturalistically created, and you can
Yeah.
photograph it to
Mhm.
show that skin color is as light or as dark as you want, right? So you can lighten it or you can darken it. And I think that, yes, indeed, when you have a naturalistic skin color there and you're photographing it, there can be an interest in making it lighter,
Hmm.
um, for whatever reason. But I don't. I don't see that
And then
there's
and you have a lot of
like
and you have
that.
a lot and you have a lot of people online manipulating photos or whatnot, saying, "See, this is how the original photo looked, and then this is how this photo looked." With trying many
And when
different.
you stand in front of the bust of Nefertiti, you see a skin that is of color, but is much lighter, arguably, than what her husband Akhenaten would have had.
Right,
And
right, right,
that's a gender difference, right? Where the women have lighter skin and want to have lighter skin. In the same way that you go to Mexico or the Philippines and you talk to an elite woman and she'll
right,
never let her daughter go out in the sun because she wants her daughter to have that white skin. That's as socioeconomic as it is racist or
right,
racial. But yeah, so a lot of these conspiracies about redoing skin colors, you don't need it. You really
right,
don't. You can have people fomenting all kinds of racist theories that the Egyptians weren't black by using the Egyptians gave them a gift by
right.
using their natural pigments of red and yellow ochre and mixes thereof. And so if men are painted with red ochre and women are painted with yellow ochre, then what's the real skin color? It's a rare thing to find a naturalistic depiction that actually shows a tan or a brown or a black.
So you don't think, like as you said, the inflammatory comments that Hawass has made, and to some people he's the key holder of a lot of
Yes.
the, and so some people are thinking if he's he's has to be either manipulating certain artifacts or hiding certain ones that may show more negroid features or
No, I
whatnot.
don't.
Historically, you don't think that he has that much
No,
power? Or yeah.
no. But I think that I remember when I was at Howard and a kid asked me in class, that he said, "Oh, Amenhotep III, was he the first?" Because Amenhotep III's face, when you look at it, it's an
Right,
African face. It's got the physiognomy of an African face. You can see a Southern Egyptian in that face. In my opinion, it's just there. And if you know the population of Egypt, and populations don't just change overnight. The
right,
they have immigration, but there's still core populations there. And this kid in Howard, he said, "Oh, was this the first Egyptian king that had the courage to show himself as the black man that he was?" And
mm,
my answer was, there's no one to tell the ancient Egyptians that they weren't perfect as they were. There were enemies to the north that were lighter. There were enemies to the south that were darker. But the
true
ancient
that.
Egyptian skin tone somewhere in the middle was perfect for them. And there was a portrait is not there to show these racial nationalist identities in the same way that we show them.
I
And
got you.
there we're putting a little too much of our own
Right,
binaries, because for us race is
right.
so
I love how
colonially
right. You
right?
use the word binary a lot. I like how.
Yeah.
Now, you're not saying that skin color was not important to the ancient Egyptians at
Mm-mm.
all?
No,
You think not? Okay.
I think color was super important to the ancient Egyptians.
Okay.
I don't think we understand exactly how, though.
Right,
Um,
right,
I think that, say, the 18th dynasty, Theban kings, and if you go to modern day Luxor and you see the skin color of the people of Luxor, it's pretty dark. It's much
right,
darker than the people of Alexandria,
right,
and their physiognomy is different from the people of the north. These were African kings with a darker skin color. What did the elites of Luxor or ancient Thebes think when a bunch of Ramessid upstarts took over the kingship in Dynasty 19?
mm,
They probably rolled their eyes and were like, "Oh my God, we have a bunch of Levantines ruling over us. This is horrible." They wouldn't put that in writing because this is an authoritarian state, but they
right,
would probably talk amongst themselves and be like, "Oh my God, what is going on? The world is going to hell in a handbasket." And it would have been because people with lighter skin were ruling. So it's certainly, if you looked too dark within even ancient Egypt, I think that there were issues. I think it's an easy thing to say color didn't matter for ancient Egypt. BS. I just can't believe that when Egypt is invading Nubia and invading the Levant regularly.
That was a
and
little bit
bringing
my
back live
point.
captives
Yeah, yeah.
and bringing
But
back
not,
live.
definitely not in the U.S. kind of antebellum South
Yeah.
way, but definitely, yeah.
But people are going to be marked by, like, if you think of Mai Carefree, the bodyguard potentially of Hatshepsut, the fan
Mm,
bearer of the king, right? Tall black man with an African type hair,
mm,
different physiognomy than an Egyptian physiognomy, and he's buried in the Valley of the Kings. And so people use that and they say, "Oh, see, no racism here," kind of like
right, right.
a black Republican saying, "There's no racism in the United States, everything's fine," right? Because I'm able to get ahead, so everything's fine.
Right,
We think the Egyptians didn't try to pull off that same kind of thing.
right,
I mean, that it wasn't just as messy in a different sort of way. I think we would
right,
be fooled
right.
because they did turn Nubia, Lower Nubia, in their times of centralized power during dynasties 4, 12, 18, 19, into a hellscape. And they did horrible things to whole populations of people in Lower Nubia. And if we don't think that a darker skin color was associated with that exploitation and that abuse, we would
Mm,
be very wrong. I
mm,
don't think we know exactly how to look for it in the record, except for those stereotypical depictions of Tutankhamun mowing over a big group of Nubians, right? And they're
mm-hmm.
darker skin, lighter skin. Yeah, that's there, but there's other things that one can look to see how skin color
Right, right, right.
might potentially be used as a cipher, short, way of communicating power. And I
Mm,
do think Egyptians did that.
mm. Now, going to the language part, do you believe that people are nowadays in modern times, and there was another big subject in the community, and it's going to sound silly. It used to be, was the Egyptian language, was Medu Neter ever really deciphered?
It
that was one.
has it
Yeah,
hasn't been deciphered. The
yeah,
reason,
of course, yeah,
well, yeah, but it's hard. This language, let me tell you this. The Egyptians never made their language easy. And they did
yeah.
so on purpose because it is meant to be exclusionary. It is
Right.
meant to give 1% of the population all the power over 99% of the population. So if you have people creating conspiracy theories that Egyptian has never been translated and we still are making shit up and don't know what it means, that's exactly the kind
making
of
up,
power.
making up vowels everywhere.
Yeah, but that's exactly the kind of power this
Right,
particular language was meant to have. It is
right.
meant to be awe-inspiring. It is meant to be a shock and awe. So
Mm,
that when
mm,
you look at it and you recognize individual signs, a foot, a hand, a
mhm,
sunset,
mhm, mhm,
animal, you're like, you can figure it out, but you will never crack that code. It is not for you.
mm.
And the power in that language still works upon our minds today. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Now, but
Yeah.
speaking of that, I'll let you get your little bit. Has it? Do you believe that the code has been cracked?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was cracked
Um,
by Jean-Francois Champollion
Champignon, right?
because not because he was
With
able to get
the
this phoneme with
Rosetta
that,
Stone. Yeah, yeah.
it's because he knew Coptic. That's
That was the
why.
key. The Coptic was the key. Correct.
It's not,
Correct.
oh, I did that phoneme and this phoneme and the Rosetta Stone. And yes, the Rosetta Stone helped him to figure out which signs were which,
Right.
but he already knew Egyptian. He already knew it. He knew Coptic. And those words, you can still use the Coptic word and link it to the ancient Egyptian word going all the way back.
Yeah, and that's
to,
what I know. Yeah.
yeah. So that
Now,
was that.
right. And deciphered, yes. But to say that one is fluent in
Oh yeah, you
each,
can't.
all right then.
The dead language. So no one's speaking it. If people still spoke Coptic,
Hmm.
then the answer would be yes. But people
But
don't
people,
speak.
but people do speak Coptic though in Egypt. There's over. Well, you're talking as far as just liturgy, right? As far
Yeah,
as in
liturgy.
okay.
I mean, okay, and I have been corrected on this before and told no, there are still villages where people speak Coptic. If those villages exist, they're being quickly lost.
Mm,
And I've never been in a setting where people are speaking Coptic with each other.
right, got you. There's
And
people
I'm
that
not saying,
claim they do, but
I'm sure, but I'm not Egyptian. So if an Egyptian tells me this is the case, okay, I'm fine with that.
yeah.
But Egypt went through another colonizing moment with the Arab invasion and another overlay of a small elite population
Mm,
that and this is where a lot of the colorism and anti-Africanism and trying to be un-Egyptian comes from. That if you cleave closer to these West Asian peoples that are taking over your economy and your government after the Arab invasion, and you start speaking Arabic and you start dressing in an Arabic way and you get rid of all of these Egyptian things, then you're going to rise faster in society. There's a reason that Egyptian language was lost so quickly. But this is not the first colonizing moment for Egypt. It's been through very many. And it is a product of that. It is a product of all of that confusion, because colonization creates wounds that you can't see anymore, but you know are there. But they harm your identity. They harm they create rifts between classes and peoples, and it can be a brutal reality, right?
Right. So as far as the last thing on the Egyptian language, so the Demotic, you said that's very difficult the cursive to pick up or whatnot. So the question is Egyptian dead that you said you tell a lot of your students at UCLA, and can you tell us what you meant by that?
Yeah, I say that Egyptology is dead.
Egyptology is dead, excuse me.
What I mean by that is that this idea of studying a Nile Valley people to the exclusion of Nubians, to the exclusion of Libyans, or Egyptology that excludes Egyptians and African descent people studying Egypt on their terms. It's not something we can do anymore. And Egyptology is also very navel gazing. It stays within its own boundaries, as any specialization does. But Egyptology needs to connect more with other parts of the world. So,
as you said, be more holistic and kind of like police reform.
More about being a world historian first and an Egyptologist second, or an archaeologist first, and in using Egyptian data sets. That's kind of what I mean. And going back to an original question about, is Egyptology racist? And I didn't answer this.
There we go.
The thing that's important is that there have been two streams of study of this African place. One is by the white people in colonial Near Eastern and languages departments, and the other has been by people of African descent or Africans within African studies departments. And those two streams have not met until quite recently. And it's unfortunate, but you'll have people who are studying the same place, but are using different methods of studying the language, different methods of studying the art history, and there needs to be more crossover between these different streams.
Isn't it like that in certain traditional universities as well, though?
Oh yeah. If you have a Near Eastern Studies department, there you'll have Egyptology. But if you have an African Studies department, you could have somebody who works with Egypt.
Right. No, I get what you're saying. They need it.
Yeah.
Right. I remember you talking about the pyramids built by slaves, and you said not really. You said by skilled and unskilled workers, and then we talked about and what you said, the unskilled workers were fed some grain, bread, and drunk beer. So you would say that they weren't slaves, correct? That built the pyramids. To that question right there.
Yes.
But you would still say that they were exploited people, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you're going back to the Jim Crow monuments where people would say, oh, okay, then we have to tear down the pyramids, right? Because they're built. And then the Egyptologist who says, oh no, but the pyramids weren't built by slaves. And then cue me to mess with everybody. To say, but isn't this the same patriarchal exploitation between draft labor and slavery? Yeah, there's a difference. But if you're being drafted into doing something and you say no, and they imprison your whole family for saying no, it's not, but it's still the exploitation of patriarchy to build a giant tomb for one guy that doesn't serve any practical purpose whatsoever. So,
some people in the community, they try to, the debate going on if it was like chattel slavery, like the transatlantic, or like indentured servitude type of deal.
And the answer is yes and yes. yes. There's no, people are messy.
Right,
They don't
right,
pick one.
right,
We're not going to solve this by saying, is it this or that? Because the answer is
right,
almost always yes and yes.
right. Always complex.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, I think I held you for. What can you say that antiquity teaches today in general?
Uh,
What can
antiquity,
antiquity? Yeah.
antiquity can teach us so many things today.
Right,
I get a
right.
flack. I get a lot of flack from colleagues about connecting the ancient Egyptian world to the modern world.
Yeah.
But I feel that I need to push against that, because the more we separate ancient Egypt and say it can only be studied in its own context, the more we fetishize it, the more we separate it, the more we
Hmm.
encourage this aliens bullshit. That word's come up a lot today in my interview,
Right.
hasn't it?
Yeah, no, I wasn't gonna. Yeah, I wasn't gonna bring up the alien thing, but yeah, unbelievable. Yeah, they to say that Africans haven't. They'll go as far as say the aliens did it, but yeah.
Yeah. Can I push back on one thing though, and or mess with one thing as I want to
Yeah,
do?
go ahead.
The idea of Kemet being a name for Egypt.
Yes.
And in African studies, it's often called Chemetology, right? Rather than Egyptology, and Egypt being a Greek imposition from
Right.
an
Mhm,
older colonialism.
mhm,
Before the Arab invasion, you have the
mhm.
Greek settlements and all of these things. So um, the word Kemet, and this is gonna mess with things a little bit, because I
Okay.
feel it's inclusive as it could be, because Kemet for the Egyptians refers to the rich black soil of the Nile Valley alone. And thus it excludes people, it actually excludes most of the people of Lower Nubia, because they weren't a part of that agrarian system. They were
Mm,
Pangrave people, they were on the move, they were desert peoples, they were Medjai who were
mm.
using their bow and arrow. They were not Kemet people. Kemet people is a farming system that,
The agrarian, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't like
That's what I
the word,
heard also. Yeah.
yeah, so I don't like using the word Kemet for all of Egypt, because then what do you talk, how do you talk about peoples of the desert or the oasis or of Nubia or Nubia adjacent, or it's just
True.
a problem.
True.
So
Note to some of these brothers using Kemet so much. They need to.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
not saying that Egypt isn't a problem, but every
Right.
name that's imposed is a problem. Like
Right.
I just found out that the Sioux Native Americans, that word
Mm.
means the snakes, and it was
Okay.
imposed on them from another competing tribe, and that, but they use it themselves now because so many people call them the Lakota or the Sioux, because
Hmm.
so it's just something that's been radically reclaimed, kind of like the word black, right?
Hmm.
So a word that was considered a horrific thing to call somebody is now radically reclaimed. The way a lot of women use the word bitch, I suppose.
Mm.
Um, but that's a tougher one,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what I'm saying is that no, Egypt is not perfect, but Kemet's not a perfect name either. I don't
Right.
know what to call this place. Do we say this little pocket of Northeast Africa?
Mm.
Even Nilotic civilizations is a problem, because what about the people who aren't living on the Nile?
Right.
Um, I say Northeast Africa more in my work, but I don't work in Ethiopia.
Mm.
So
Do
you want to solve it, not
how
easy. It's
often
not.
how yeah, true, complex. How often do you work with Nubia or whatnot?
I don't.
You don't?
But I did just write a last chapter about Taharka, about Pianki and Taharka in my Good Kings book. So
Okay.
I do work with the 25th dynasty, which is Nubia as a larger entity, Kush as a smaller, more specific place. And my first article published in Egyptology was about the edifice of Taharka at Karnak.
Okay.
You can find that on my Squarespace page if
Okay.
you want.
Okay. Okay.
At some deep scholarship going back to the year 2000. So yeah, but we've just brought into UCLA, or will soon bring in, Dr. Solange Ashby, who
Yeah, definitely know about him.
she's going to
Yeah.
be an assistant professor at UCLA within the year. She has a postdoc to serve out. She gets to serve out a postdoc first,
All right.
and she'll be joining us. And she works at Philae and other Nubian sites, and works with Nubian cultural identity,
Have you
cultural
heard
memory.
of Have you heard
Yeah.
of Vanessa Davies?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She taught a while back, taught language and other things. Yeah, she's very good.
Because I know she deals with Nubia a lot. I believe. How about Sally Ann Ashton?
Yeah, she does as well. Yeah.
Okay.
And there's a huge Nubian, it's its own field, right? Stuart Tyson Smith, he deals with Nubia and works in Sudan every year. And a lot of our students work on his digs. There's a massive field of Nubiology, which is very much its own subspecialty and its own literature. And there's a lot of, it's really exploded and become much more integrated Egyptology.
Right. So is it still a white woman's game, as you call it? where it used to be a white man's game, now Egyptology
now
is a white woman?
Yeah, just count up and see who.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
I was just reading some statistic. They're like, oh no, women have made all of these strides, and now they're 50% of the academy here or there. And I said, that's great. So now they've let the women in when they carpet bomb the whole institution of academia from the inside out. So great. Now they let the women and people of color in. Woohoo.
If you were to start, if you were to go back and start again to become an Egyptologist again, would you go a different route or different school, or would you have done the same?
This is a question that assumes that I had way more choice than I did, because, and I say this all the time when I'm talking to younger people, we don't have.
I was listening to your Karen privilege and what a video.
Yeah.
So you always talk about your privilege. Don't take it back now.
No. But what I'm saying is, you're right. So because I have the choice to do it at all. But then once you're in the academic field, what people say yes to is what they say yes to. I got into one university that paid me a stipend, so that's where I went. So it would probably be much the same. And when I'm dealing with the acceptance,
would it have been more like the luck of the draw as well? I guess
it always is. Like, I'm dealing with acceptances right now, and I'll call up a student and say, okay, we've just gone through your application, and I think you're gonna be accepted. Have you received any other offers? No, I haven't. Oh my God, I'm thrilled. And so, and some people do have other offers and they have a decision to make. I did not have such a decision. And all I'm saying is, privilege aside, and yes,
then you became a rock star of the Egyptology world for a couple of years, right?
I don't know what that means. I think it's because I enjoy
Hollywood.
No. I enjoy speaking about these. I enjoy touching the third rail.
Because I was going to ask you, how did that end up when you got on the show of Stephen Colbert? How did that? Was it Stephen Colbert? Yeah, or
Craig Ferguson, but it's okay.
Excuse me, Colbert.
It's okay.
Yeah, Craig Ferguson.
It is because I'm in Los Angeles, and because I was co-curator of the Tutankhamun exhibition, and at the exhibition opening, where all the VIP
being in LA has its privileges as well.
Yeah. Right. So then all the curators are assigned to give tours to different people, and Craig Ferguson wanted a tour, and they said, Kara, why don't you give Craig a tour? And I don't stay up late to watch late night TV, and I didn't know who he was.
Right.
But then my tour ended up being on his monologue the next night, and and then I ended up being on the show multiple times. But because he is very much a fan of history and Egypt and other things,
and a fan of you too. I
guess.
But, I'm a fan too. I'm not gonna lie.
It's funny, but so he just was super interested, and then I ended up on TV. And because I'll say anything that comes to my mind, I think that makes for more interesting television fodder, rather than somebody who's more careful and circumspect and doesn't say whatever comes to their mind. So not whatever, but you get the idea. It's supposed to that's entertaining.
Right. So what other things do you have in the works besides the book coming out that you can talk about, I guess? I'm graduate training is continuing at UCLA, and our graduate students are multidisciplinary experts on things that are not just Egyptologically based. Takes up a lot of my time. But this summer I'm going to be working on my coffins book, and that's where I'm going to put all of my energy. Doing this work for a dozen years or more, and I need to publish the big volume. It needs to be out there, and it's going to include many pretty pictures and captions and annotations, and it's going to be
Yeah,
Pretty extensive.
Yeah. So that's where I'm going to put all my energy. And then come the fall, when my good kings appears and people start to freak out about some of the things that I have said, then I'll deal with those conversations, because I have a feeling that's going to it's going to bring a lot of
Right.
difficult conversations.
I've heard you speak about, and it's gonna bring you in the spotlight again, in media and all that. But maybe late night show again.
I
But
don't know. I don't know. Let's see.
but I remember you saying that you kind of want to get back into, because you've been out of it. You want to get back into to your field more, instead of the Hollywood thing or whatnot.
Yeah.
And get back in. Going back to Egypt once COVID dies down and all this.
Yeah, so I'm hoping to go to Egypt this September to do some work on coffins in the Egyptian Museum, Cairo, and now in the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization. So I'm hoping to get back there for that, and maybe in December too. So we'll see. But I do have some media projects as well, Robert. So I can't talk about them.
I figured that. That's what I said, that you could talk about.
There are things. There are irons in the fire that are getting hot, and we'll see what can happen with them.
Yeah, you can't stop the momentum. You got to keep it going. All right. Well, last thing, what would you say to a future wannabe Egyptologist? What?
Yeah, keep reading, keep studying, keep learning, and if you can get to a place to study for a degree, go to a place where if you have a choice. We don't often get a choice,
right.
Where you will be supported personally, because academia is a really tough and can be very soul destroying, brutal, even cruel.
Because I remember you talked about elitism and the certain powerhouses when it comes to Egyptology and things like that. Well,
there's not a lot of joyful learning there. Right. There needs to be more joyful learning, joyful discussion, joyful exploration, and less browbeat. So I would gravitate towards those places rather than others. So.
Right. All right. Well, we're gonna wrap this up. Thank you, Dr. Cara Cooney, for giving me the chance to talk to you. Hopefully, I hope that we can have another discussion in the future sometime, 6 months, a year from now, or whatnot.
Let me know.
Definitely. All right. Well, you enjoy the rest of yours. Is it still morning there or afternoon now?
It is. It's 11:30 a.m. Yeah.
11:30. Okay. Yeah. And it's
so enjoy your evening, and
absolutely.
Say to Osmond for me and eat some fish.
Oh yeah. Alrighty then. Thank you.
Take care, Robert.
All right.